What if you could go back and start over with your athletic career? What would you do differently? Today, we're talking to Tim Johnson. He was a 6 time national champion and a Red Bull athlete who moved on to marketing and advocacy roles in the bike industry and beyond. In this conversation, we talk about the best decisions he made as well as the mistakes along the way. Tim, thank you so much for being here for all this, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because you've had a chance to go through the entire spectrum from pro athlete competing in world championships, winning national titles, to then going into the industry side of things, working with USA Cycling and Cannondale and Strava and all these different companies along the way. And you've worked as an athlete and you've also worked with athletes. So I think there's so much for us to kind of talk about here and to kind of dig into with sort of this theme of like, what can we share? What do the athletes need to know? What can they take away from this that they can immediately, put into perspective for their own careers, and how can they maybe apply some of the lessons that you've learned along the way? So I guess, like, where should we even begin? I mean, how did you become a pro athlete? What was the moment for you when everything changed and all of a sudden you're now a full-time athlete?
Yeah, just diving right into that first moment when you realize that someone will support you, someone you don't know sees something in you that is supportable, like either your talent or your place in a sport, maybe timing works out, whatever it is, like that kind of thing is so empowering. It's sometimes you're ready to accept it. Sometimes you're still not ready. You don't really realize what you're getting into. But I think for me, probably the thing that sticks out in my mind as like a wild moment that I didn't fully expect was a new bike brand that had just started to come in the market. Of course, through a network, friend of a friend of a friend, there was a person running marketing who was like, "Oh, you know what? You're now getting pretty good at cyclocross." I was in my second year of it. I had been junior national champion the year before on a mountain bike by chance. They had a cyclocross bike coming up in their lineup, and we were put together. It was a couple phone calls, and then all of a sudden I had 2 complete bikes in boxes on the porch of my parents' house. And that for me was like, wow, this means that someone in California was interested enough in the career that I was just starting, and felt like in exchange for helping them by getting some exposure to this new brand, it was a Voodoo bike. They were like really small, that, all I had to do was ride as fast as I could and tell everyone I knew how great these bikes were. And that was it. Like, that was the full exchange. That was the value prop. That was like the expectation. And it was awesome. It felt like $1,000,000.
That's incredible. I mean, this is early on in your career. So did you have any expectation of what it meant to be sponsored? I mean, were there people that you looked to? I mean, how did you think about sponsorship?
Yeah, it was kind of an unusual thing because I knew of sponsorship through skateboarding and BMX. I knew about watching and joining, like, the Powell Peralta, the Bones Brigade. I knew enough to like send a self-addressed stamped envelope to get stickers back. I knew enough to like watch, for the new BMX Plus, magazine that would come on the newsstand. So I knew that there was a thing where if you were good at something, then companies would want to put their branding on you and to support you in your racing. I didn't really know the function of it. I didn't know that there were bonuses for winning. I didn't know that there were salaries. Like, I kind of had this idea that like it all just kind of came together. I didn't really know. But I think that's kind of like I got into it in a real magical way like that. And it was very authentic. I wasn't chasing after something that didn't exist. I kind of was plucked out of nowhere, which is where I felt like I was nowhere. So, but yeah, I guess like the business side of it didn't come in to consideration for a lot longer.
So then you got You got free bikes, you went out and crushed races, and then
Yeah.
what happened after that? What was your next kinda step forward when it comes to being an athlete, being sponsored, kind of figuring this stuff out? When was the next unlock for you?
Well, probably the next unlock was at the point where I was just about to outgrow my local community. So I've got these bikes from California, but I was still riding and racing with my local club. And at that point, it was literally just bikes, and then everything else was with my club, my training partners, rides to and from the races, entry fees, if I were able to get those. I wasn't getting paid, but I might be able to break even basically if they were able to support me financially. And so the next big gap or the next big change in kind of that situation was I got an offer. And so this was like kind of funny also, as you realize now what it meant then, to join the Cannondale. God, why am I blanking on the drink? Sobe Cannondale. And Sobe Cannondale had a pro level team. I'm guessing 6 riders maybe, and then they had a community level grassroots team below that, which might have been like 50. It was much bigger. And I got this offer, to join the SoBe community level team. And I think it was a bike or a discount on a bike and like, $300 or something for entry fees, which at the time was like 10 races. And I was so excited because this is like, I know this brand, I know the team, I know the branding from the magazines. I knew what they were doing in like amateur racing, expert level racing, and I was so pumped. And so in my mind, it's a yes, like 100% yes. So I go for a couple rides with the guy who's managing our local club, the CCB team, and I was like, yeah, this person like asked me if I wanted to join Sobe Cannondale. And he's like, huh. And he kind of like sits on it for a while. And then he calls a couple days later and he's like, all right, I understand that you're really excited about this, but let's talk about it. And what he did was he helped me realize that even though I was going to be like, hired by this new team, I wasn't getting hired for anything. I was getting less than what I was getting from my team, my club. And in exchange, I would be giving up everything. I would not have the support of my club. And it made me realize that yes, the shiny object might be the thing that takes you away. It might give you an opportunity, but it definitely didn't add to my career, and it definitely didn't add to what I had already been building, which was the real support of my local community of people, of friends, of trading partners, of everything there. Um, so that was kind of like, you know what is the true value of this? Is free stuff really that important, or is it when you need people the most, like when you are at your, I don't know, like it just kind of brought it home that it was all about the people as much as it is about the product, and why they want to support you. So, in the end, it was a much, you know, easier decision, to think back on it now and realize that I made the right call. But at the time, I was pretty stressed. I was like, oh my God, this is my chance. I'm going to be
300
a
bucks
pro.
is 300 bucks,
Yeah,
man.
exactly.
So you held out on Cannondale, but we all know that you eventually did end up with Cannondale. Was that sort of did you when you walked away from it, did they come back with a bigger offer, or did you, keep pushing it for another season?
Bigger offer. Yeah. No, I think that was like I don't even know who was pulling together those teams at the time. But now that I know from being on the other side of it, you've got the opportunity with a brand that wants to get into the bike world. They want to be able to support high level athletes and have a grassroots team below that. They don't really, they want to make a positive difference in the sport that they're a part of. Um, and sometimes it just doesn't always work out. There was no follow up. There's no bigger offer, no nothing. And it was probably 10 years later that I ended up actually signing with Cannondale as a sponsored athlete. But that was as a professional, as a global athlete. eventually getting my own signature model, like all this, all the things that came along with like a really huge deal at the time for me. But yeah, I mean, it's funny to look back at it on it now.
What were some of the so not taking a deal like that was clearly one of the right things to do in that era. What were some of the other things that you kind of did early in your career that were foundational to becoming a pro athlete down the line? I mean, were there other decisions like that that you made that really helped you long term?
I think one of the decisions I made was to be able to be adaptable and to go beyond just mountain biking, which is where I started. To be able to go to what a cyclocross race was without knowing anything about it, I was, I was just hanging out with my friends basically. It didn't matter what kind of bike we were riding. I look at athletes now and since then that are just like, I'm a road cyclist, I'm a mountain biker, I'm a cyclocross, I'm a gravel rider, and they hold these really narrow, identities that, looking back at my career, that was one of the biggest attributes I had, was the ability to be adaptable and to go between these different groups, not just the riding itself and the skills that were needed, but also the groups of people who were a part of it. And I loved it. I think it was it's probably the biggest unlock for me overall, was my ability to kind of do all those different sports at a high level.
So you competed in the world championships, cyclocross, road, and mountain biking, right? So I mean, as far as being
Yeah.
adaptable, you've every terrain, every style of riding possible. That's actually pretty incredible overall.
Well, I didn't get into trials all that much. I think I only ever did like 2 or 3 trials events, and they were like the Scott trials or real trials. So, I don't know, man. I My resume is still got a big gap in
I can help you.
it.
So throughout the rest of your career, you go on, you build this amazing career where you've competed in, all these different world championships. You've been on the podium at world championships. You've won multiple national championships. What were some of the key moments throughout your career? Once you were sponsored, once you were up and running as a pro athlete, what were some of those moments that you think were kind of major inflection points? Like, what did you, if you audit your career as an athlete, what are some of the things that you think really were the right things to do or made the biggest impact on your career overall?
Some of the right things to do, probably right off the bat, was when I turned pro on the road, and I had the choice of joining kind of the new up and coming team or the established, relatively boring team. It was at the time, it was the Mercury team versus Saturn, and Saturn had been around for a few years, was fairly flat, even like budget wise, the racing quality. They had a men's and a women's team, but they weren't really known as being super flashy. On the other hand, Mercury was like going up like a hockey stick, as far as budget. They were hiring all these new riders. They were going international. They're going to go to the tour. They're going to, win every race. And they were winning quite a bit. And so I actually tried out with that team. And through a series of like sheer, through a lot of luck, I was able to basically figure out that the person running the Mercury team didn't give a shit about me at all. I was still at this point of like, oh, bike racing is so fun. It's so cool. And I hadn't quite gotten into the business side of it yet. Um, because I had been around great people who were really supportive of seeing me succeed at the best of my abilities. And so here I was basically begging to be on a team like everyone does. And I realized that this guy just didn't give a shit who I was just trying to like check a box and, get a new rider who was like pretty good. I was, the amateur road cyclist of the year with Velonews. Like I was kind of like on my way up, and I realized, that this is actually during IM, like instant message, AOL instant message was just coming out, and like, you're like, shoot a message like, hey, the Mercury Tour is coming up in Steamboat Springs, this mountain bike stage race. Uh, I don't have any, I don't have any wheels for my mountain bike. Like, do you think that, blah, blah, blah. And it just goes unanswered. And like little stuff like that, huge in my world, tiny for him, never got answered, ended up going there basically on a borrowed bike and doing all this. Um, and at the time, it was like this real big decision of the boring team has reached out and said, Tim, we like you. We like your versatility. We know you're an up and coming rider. We want to support you. Um, that conversation led to who is running the team, why they have the team, where they're going, really spending time to get to know these people. And they took the time to get to know me. So I was like, I'm in. I'm going with Saturn. This is the best thing ever. Um, Best decision I made because the Mercury team ended up fully exploding, blowing up. The entire program disappeared in like 18 months. They did end up winning everything, but it was a total mess. Like the whole thing was like held together by, duct tape and bubble gum. And I ended up staying on Saturn for 3 years. I met my future wife. Like it was the best thing I could have done for me and my career. I raced cyclocross, I raced on the road, all that. So, anyways, long story short, that was a huge inflection point for me, realizing that I should go with the familial kind of atmosphere of a team rather than just like what is this shiny object next to me.
It sounds like between that and this original Cannondale Sobe deal, you both times were able to walk away from something because the depth of the relationship wasn't there. Like there was an opportunity on the table that looked good on paper, that sounded interesting, but when you really thought about what the relationship was going to be, there wasn't anything that meaningful there. Like getting a pallet of energy drink and $300 versus the relationships that you built with your current sponsor. It sounds like the same thing here, where it was like these are real people that actually care and will support my growth. I mean, the relationship side of things is so important, and given the option, seems like that was the move every single time.
Yeah, it's funny to think back at it now, but it really is true because that one of the original mechanics for that team, I just got a note the other day from his wife saying, "Hey, it's a big birthday for him coming up, and I'm looking for stories from his past. Like, do you have anything?" And of course, I had a couple just from when we first met, but that's 25 years ago now.
That's amazing. What were there other moments? I mean, it sounds like I bet there's probably 5 or 6 times where you bet on the relationship and the depth of the relationship to keep things going or to kind of find your path. But were there other things throughout the rest of your pro athlete career that kind of stand out?
Something that came up the other day, and I do have a huge mistake that I made, but I do have something recently came up the other day where during my career, it's everything's going ahead full. I'm winning national titles. I'm being paid really well. I've made a switch to all cyclocross, some road. Um, I wasn't doing much mountain bike at the time. Gravel was still off into the distance, and I was getting attention from Specialized, and Specialized was this unbreakable, if you're in, you're in. If you're not in, you just wish that you were in. And it kind of like I had a chance to meet the CMO, learn about what Specialized was doing, where they were going, just how much they take racing as a part of their company's DNA. Um, and that was probably a year and a half of talking, trying to figure out like what we can do together. Will it work? Is it, it's a global relationship. What kind of options are there? And I think at the time, one of the things that was really appealing was that it was going to be one paycheck, and they would take all categories and just say, you now ride for Specialized Factory Racing. This is your contract. This is your paycheck every month. And at the time, I was managing like 10 different contracts of my own, along with the team that we were running, the Cannondale Cyclocross World Team. And it was a lot of work. You're doing emails after the races, before the races. You're doing media. You're arranging literally everything yourself, from the tires that you're riding on to the components to the bikes to the travel to the hotels, everything. um, and you have to go fast. So like real a huge amount of work, and but it also gave you the flexibility to pursue new opportunities and relationships, and can this be swapped out for that? Can we go in this direction, maybe as a team or as an individual, and find new fertile ground. And then with Specialized, you were just you were along for the ride. So it came up the other day just in conversation because sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. They have a huge list of alum who have had great success riding Specialized, and they also have a list of alum who haven't quite found their feet, and maybe have gone on to something different. So, I think in the end, I made the right choices for me each of those times, in just in deciding to kind of stay with the program that we had developed. But at the time, it's a really attractive thing to think, oh, I can simplify everything in just a one paycheck and be done.
Doesn't ever seem like it's that simple in the end, but yeah, from the outside, like, because every sponsor, it's not just one email, it's not just one contact. There's so much that comes with each and every one,
Mm,
and it exponentially increases every time you add one additional sponsor. Like it continues to ratchet up, and
yeah,
yeah, it's the idea of just having one of those instead of 10 of those sounds nice, you know?
yeah.
So mistakes were made. Uh, tell me about some of the mistakes that now that you can kind of look back at your career, what were the missteps that you had along the way that maybe it's sort of a cautionary tale for other athletes, or maybe it's something that, if you could just do it slightly different, like what would you do?
Yeah, so I think the big mistake for me was early in my career. I think I caught a bit of that like dream is reality fever, where because I dreamt of something, it meant that reality must follow. And so, like everyone, I was like, I want to do the tour. I want to do the tour. I want to race in the tour. I want to race in the tour. And so, as a young road racer in the Lance era, like the tour is the thing, and here I was, turned pro in 2000. Um, and I got a chance to ride for a world tour team in 2004 and five. I signed a 2-year deal. Um, I really shouldn't have done it, but it was the thing that I thought I needed to do. I thought was really the best thing for me. And I basically walked into a world of pro bike racing that was unlike anything else I knew. And it was full of drugs, and the people who were a part of it were just absolute dogs, who I really didn't want to have anything to do with. And it really shook me, and it like knocked me back. I came back to the US with my tail between my legs and basically quit the sport. So I look at that both as a mistake that I made in kind of letting myself kind of go too far into a sport that I was probably not quite ready for, maybe ever. And the sport itself wasn't all that appealing in reality either. So then again, it was also a real benefit because it was a cautionary tale for me. I lived through this cautionary tale. And to kind of bring it back to like mid mid career, a few years later with Red Bull, was that I was now this first cyclocross road racer that they had sponsored, because um, having had really just like they're heartbroken with road racing with doping. And so my contract was kind of like a special yes, because of the fact that I had left road racing with my tail between my legs and quit the sport, because it also broke my heart. So it kind of gave me this new opportunity to live a different life through cyclocross, and it became, the foundation of what was the rest of my career.
Wild. What what was it like those first few years on Red Bull? I mean, Red Bull, of course, is kind of the holy grail for most athletes now, but that was still relatively early days in Red Bull in the USA, and kind of defining who they were going to be and what it meant to be a Red Bull athlete, especially, as the first cyclocross athlete to put, the blue and silver helmet on. What was that? What was that era like?
Yeah, I guess I've been told that it was kind of the end of the glory days, and was, also before it became a little bit more cut and dry, like, the expectations versus the reality. So I didn't really know much about Red Bull in endurance sports. I knew about Red Bull in, what was action sports at the time. I like gobbled up X Games. Like I said, I was a BMX rider as a kid. I watched rally racing. Um, I had seen Red Bull athletes in other sports, but I'd never really seen them in endurance sports. And so that was a big thing for me to kind of go, um, to get that call. And like all things Red Bull, it came out of nowhere. It was like all of my I had been vetted basically. They called everyone but me. And then all of a sudden I get this random call from Jeff Regis, who's like, "Hey dude, how's it going? I'd love to get together and talk to you about Red Bull." I'm like, "What? Who's this? How'd you get my number? Like, where did this come from?" Um, and that was really the start of it. But yeah, I guess like, trying to figure out you know, where where I could fit into what Red Bull wanted based on what I was doing. But I was a part of a new and up and coming community of athletes and amateur athletes around the country and in the world who were building up cyclocross as a whole. The sport was on the rise, and I was kind of the face of that sport for Red Bull. So, one of the ways that they succeed is that they go really deep in identifying who might represent a group of people for the brand, and then support them in basically whatever they want to do. And so, trying to figure out like, okay, what is cross? Like even identifying it, like putting out content that talked about what the sport was, like where it happens. Oh, it's every weekend around the country for half the year. Thousands and thousands of people are doing it. Wait, there were, hundreds last year and now there are thousands. Like, wow, this sounds cool. I want to go do it. um, and I was like able to elevate the competitive level of the sport, because all of a sudden now people paid attention to the races and the races got better. And then there's broadcasting. At the time it was like early streaming days, and then you get on NBC or some of the cable networks and with a broadcast camera, and it's like, holy shit, like this sport looks totally different. So all of that was really cool to be a part of, and to have a phone call on a Tuesday and then have something show up on the weekend because of the decisions that you're helping to make, connecting sponsorships, and all of a sudden the value of every brand partnership that you have as an athlete increases because now you're being shown through all Red Bull channels too. And that was early Red Bull Media House days. Red Bull TV was still not really around yet, but yeah, I mean, just everything just grew in size and scale.
You got pulled into the content machine, and I
But
talk.
what was content
Yeah,
at the time?
still early days of all of that stuff, and obviously I talk a lot about content and how important and how big of a lever that is for any sort of athlete. I guess the other question is, as someone who is sort of developing a category within Red Bull and a newer athlete and all these different things, how did and you've also been on the other side of this too, managing athletes at some of these other brands that are sort of new and emerging, but
Mhm.
thinking about how to set expectations with an athlete. Were there expectations that you were aware of, and not just Red Bull, I suppose, but with the other sponsors? How did a sponsor in that era, or how do you now think about this? How to set expectations of like, are you being a good athlete, asset, executing according to plan? Like, how did you understand that either at the time or now, or did that change over time? I'd be curious to know what your relationship was with understanding your role essentially.
Yeah, so funny story at first was joining the Saturn team. So it's a car company, and your riding kit is the brand. You're riding around in a big Saturn jersey, but you also got a car, and the car had stickers on it that said Saturn, and it said Saturn Pro Cycling Team. And one of the things that they said at the first training camp was like, all right, you got to be careful because you're always representing Saturn. When you're riding or driving, you represent Saturn. And here's why it matters. And the story was the team owner was driving a team car with stickers on it and drove like an asshole. And at the time, it wasn't a phone call or email, it was like a letter. And a letter came in the mail to Saturn that said, I was driving on the highway and I was cut off by a car that had Saturn Pro Cycling written on it. I think that this person was driving like an idiot, endangered me and my family, like whatever it was. And so that signal was, you always have to represent the brand who's given you the support. They put their branding on you. By the time a Red Bull relationship came around, what was, almost 10 years later, I had already been through all these different relationships with other companies and brands. And you really do have to live and breathe the ideals of the companies who you represent. And if it's not a good fit, then it's not a good fit, and it really needs to it needs to end. And so that's why, like, you know, you might have seen this yourself, where an athlete who you know of as, a good egg, super sweetheart, is sponsored by a company that has an edge to it. They're like tough, tough guy brand, or like, maybe they're into some weird stuff. And it's kind of like the quintessential like Monster versus Red Bull sponsorship, paradox, basically, is that, you know, is that person really a Monster athlete, or is that person a Red Bull athlete? It's kind of funny, but it really does hold true. And you see it time and time again. Um, and I don't know, like, I don't know how long that will really continue for, but for me, that was pretty clear that by the time I had the ability to choose the companies that I was looking to work with, um, it was really important to me. Early on, it was like, oh God, I can get a sticker and like, $10 and I'll have a sponsor, but it really does matter. It's a part of who you are and what you do and how you do it.
It's just also that long-term relationship that you want to be a part of. When things are easy, it makes it easier to continue doing it. So if you're in it for the long haul, you want to be an athlete for the long haul, it's best to like invest your time into finding the right fit so that you actually can stay with that person for a long time or stay with that brand or, you know, um, makes a big difference, it seems, in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky that Cannondale, SRAM are both, decade plus relationships, and Cannondale, I think, is like 17 years now. Um, and it is the difference between a career versus just like a couple years that you do at a high level. Um, and I think that in this day and age where you've got brands looking to get their marketing needs taken care of, they can choose UGC really easily, and they can have millions of representatives out in the public, um, for peanuts compared to what a relationship would cost with a really good high level athlete, or or representative, rather than a bunch of influencers. And like, it's a it I think it's the difference between an intentional relationship versus like a circumstantial relationship. And the more sophisticated a consumer is, the more easily they can kind of see that. Um, and I think it's okay for some brands. It's definitely not okay, for others that want to maintain a really strong relationship with a consumer. Um, and it's like sports are a funny place to do that, because for a lot of athletes, their time in the spotlight is so short. You kind of have to do this like dance of, do I take advantage of what's right in front of me for a short period of time, or do I invest that time to try and find the right relationships? And some athletes never find them. So I've been really lucky that I've had that chance.
Yeah. What you've had all these experiences, you've done all these things, you've had a chance to sort of reflect. What's some of the advice that you're giving some of the athletes that you kind of interface with now? I mean, you've been a mentor to a lot of up and coming athletes in all different sports, within bike, and probably some even non-bike athletes,
Mhm.
here and there. But what's, based on the perspective that you have from being a pro athlete and then also working in the industry, what are the things that you're seeing as like really important things for athletes to be paying attention to?
I think there are a number of like fundamental skills that you develop over time. The business side of things is, the financial, the contractual. How are these relationships built into a contract? Are the deliverables reasonable? Can you actually deliver on them? Are you asking for the right things? Are you just accepting what's being offered to you? So there's always this business side of the conversation of, hey, you know what? Um, what you've just done is undercut yourself and all the other athletes out there by taking a bad deal. Or, hey, you know what? Maybe it's okay if you have a season without a sponsor in this category because it just doesn't make sense. And it's also you don't have that. There's no ROI on it because the amount of time that you're going to spend fulfilling this one contract is going to bust the rest of your deals. Um, I see a lot of athletes who are spread too thin. And as someone who did a number of different, racing category disciplines between road and cyclocross in the same year, um, I I understand that you think you can do everything, but there is a point at which you can't. I wish I knew that lesson earlier than when I did. I really tried to pull back, and it was probably too late, and I kind of ended up kind of bouncing out of the sport instead of like really finishing. That for me, that's always a regret of mine. So I think that's a big thing for the business side. As an athlete, between endurance athletics and skill-based sport, there's a little bit of expectation that age equals decreased ability or decreased results. Endurance, it seems like it's getting older. It seems like you can last longer in endurance sports, which is great. I see it a little bit in skill-based sports. But the biggest unlock for that is just having a presence in the community that you're a part of last longer. And I think that's where like some of the things that you're also talking about and teaching is, can an athlete identify what they might be able to bring to a community for years after they're done competing? And then once you identify that, how do you do it? There's a lot of like, I think for an athlete who's going for a medal or a world championship jersey like the one over your shoulder, there's like you have a competitive mindset, which is with the results focus, and then there's this other side of things where you're trying to be creative and trying to show your the other side of yourself. There is a real limit to be able to do that by yourself, and I ask athletes like, who else do you have with you? Is it a partner? Is it a mentor? Is it an agent? Is it a manager? Are you aware of like the ability to get help? Because you think that you can do it all by yourself, but you will definitely find your limit, and you will start to see the decrease in everything that's a part of it. You'll see the results go down. You might start to suffer financially, and you might just end up kind of petering out, which is always a fear for an athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, referencing the jersey over my shoulder here, you mentioned something about, kind of transitioning to being in the sport and sticking around and playing a different role in the sport. And Kate, whose jersey is behind me, Kate Courtney shared this book with me a while ago called Strength to Strength. I don't know if you've read it, but
I
it
haven't.
it really talks about, in the first part of your career, you've got all this energy and you're just going after it and you're accomplishing the goal. Then you accomplish X amount of goals, but then as time goes on, like you're not going to have the same big first wins that you had, but you have to find kind of new meaning or new ways to impact and grow and whatever. And for me specifically, and maybe this rings true for you on a level, it's like we had one kind of wins and we had
Hmm.
to sort of say like, I'm not going to have wins like that anymore, but there's still another style of wins that I can have, or another way for me to contribute to the thing that I care about the most. And so often that comes in the form of mentorship or teaching or, content like we're doing now, and things like that, where we can pass on those things, and we kind of find our second wind, as it were, in being able to share the lessons and being able to, provide value back to the people that are on their first kind of mountain, as it were.
Yeah, it says a lot about depth, and if you can, in your original ascent to the top of your sport, there is a difference between someone who just shows up and does the thing and leaves. And then there's those that are deep in the community and they've kind of layered in these different ways that they impact it. For me, that was through bike advocacy. I really got involved in it because of one of my peers who's like, he was riding his bike to work back before people rode their bikes to work and kept telling me how sketchy it was. This is like late 90s. And by the time I had been, on the top of podiums and doing all the bike racing side of things, we would go on these bike rides, and he'd be like, "Oh, there's a bike path right there. I can't believe it's finally here." And he described to me how it takes like 2 or 3 years of planning to get a bike path on a road. And I was like, "Oh, God, that's crazy." And then there's this world of advocacy that these people are out there trying to make it safe for everyone to ride. So that really became something that I did. For an endurance athlete, it's really easy to start coaching because everyone thinks that because you're fast, you must be a good coach. And I'd always say like, no, man, it's tough for me to coach myself. Like for me to coach you too, would it's too much for me. I'd rather not. So I ended up going into advocacy and started fundraising on these different bike rides for people for bikes. But it opened up a whole other world of people who don't care about your results, don't care about what you did at the last race, and really care about your impact on a community. And so that allowed me to think of what I was doing in a very different way. And to go probably to, late chapters in that book is like the pressure of performing is lessened by the things that you're doing outside of that sport, and you then kind of put it into like a box where, or at least a portion of your daily life where you think about, yes, preparing for the race, getting ready, skills, fitness, whatever, but it's not an end all be all, because that's often what will kill the like fire within an athlete, is that pressure of performance and the anxiety that you might feel. Oh shit, if I'm not as fast as I was the last time, I may as well not even show up. And I've seen that so many times. I mean, having been around the sport of cycling for now 25 plus years, I had a lot of peers who just disappeared. You never saw them again. And they were really good. They were just as good as the next, world champion, but they're just not here anymore because they couldn't quite figure out how to do it.
That's a huge thing, and it's kind of been fun watching Payson develop his podcast and that whole community that surrounds that and supports that. And in his way, it's a way to grow the sport, be an advocate, get a community behind certain things, and have a voice that extends beyond results, right? And so much of kind of what I talk about is like, how do you build that community in the right way? And I think at Red Bull, one of the things that I saw, which it sounds so silly, but the gaming program that spun up there
Mm,
toward the end of both of our time with Red Bull, we saw gaming come in, and I think a lot of the quote unquote purists at Red Bull were like, "What is this? This isn't a
yeah,
sport." And I get that, but I also saw something that I think a lot of people didn't, and what that was community building.
yeah,
These
for sure.
the gamers were absolute wizards at building communities around the thing that they loved. And there were a lot of lessons that the purists could have learned from, hey, this guy doesn't have to be the best gamer for the rest of his life. He just has to be an advocate and build this community and speak to this community and do the things that they care about and be who he is. That's all he has to do for the rest of his
Yeah,
time. And he's the one that's going to say when it's over, not a new CEO or a consultant that comes in and slashes a budget. Like, you're
yeah.
in control when you have a community and a voice and you're an advocate and all that stuff.
Yeah, that reality is really, really stark to see. But yeah, I mean, gamers really do have this ability to do their sport in front of so many more people because of the digital connection of a Twitch stream or whatever it is. And in cycling, one of the things that happened with the sport of cyclocross was that it kind of peaked, as a sport and started to go down, and so it started to lose that, the broadcasts and the big events were starting to be hard to put on. And so a lot of the riders who were kind of coming up as I was leaving the sport are left without a real platform. They're left without the ability to show how good they are at this one thing. And so, if it is social media, if it is content creation, if it is being able to translate, how they do the other parts of their sport for people that they find it interesting and follow along, it's one way to get out of it. Like running is an interesting thing with the rise of trail running. I know you got into it big time, and it's just like everything evolves, and if you're an athlete who's too stuck in your ways, you will see your relevancy just disappear, and that's really tough for a lot of athletes. But it'll never stop. I mean, that's one of the things that you have to realize is that people always find new things that they're interested in. If you're lucky enough to be relevant for a long time, then you're Tony Hawk, and you're just like you're laughing all the way to the bank, and it's awesome.
So you talked about kind of, bouncing out of the sport, and then, you obviously landed, you were working with a lot of companies, director of marketing in a couple places, and, obviously you've maintained relationships within the bike industry and with some of those sponsors like Cannondale. What has been your experience kind of transitioning from pro athlete to professional?
Yeah. So, I guess one of the things that really helped was understanding what I knew in the context of business. And I was lucky to find a program at Tuck, which is a business school out of Dartmouth in New Hampshire, and it was for former elite athletes and military. And it seems like an unlikely mix until you get there, and there's 60 people who have maybe been, at the helm of a ship in the Navy, or, a reserve in the Army, or we're a triathlete, or, we're like a figure skater. Because kind of at the core of it is you have this really short term at which you are at the top of your game. And how do you learn how to navigate into the business world? So I had a chance to do that, and it was really interesting because I had been building my own career and building my own list of sponsors, and kind of helping to create a team and manage other people and other riders. You learn a lot over that kind of time frame that you don't necessarily recognize as skills. But then when you're dropped into a group learning, how to read a financial statement from a company like Walmart, like you realize what you don't know. But when you put it into the context of what you've all learned, it becomes a lot easier to understand and a lot easier to kind of take in. So that was really good. I think that so continuing education is a great way to kind of maneuver your way beyond. Um, I think things are changing anyways. Like cycling at the time, I was being told not to go to college because then I would take away from my training, which Sepp Kuss winning the Vuelta and being on the front of the Tour de France for the last couple of years, he went to college. Kate over your shoulder went to Stanford. Like it's okay to go to school and then get out as an endurance athlete and race at the top of your sport. I think like nowadays athletes transitioning will have a little bit more to go on already. But as far as like keeping a network, keeping in touch with the people who you've been working with or maybe have met, I think a lot of athletes with the headphones and warming up on a trainer and cycling, or like insisting on running by themselves because they have to do their training, you end up missing out on a lot of what the power of a network. You really really benefit by meeting people, by listening, by asking questions, by offering up yourself, like your true self, and not just like, the hype master, like pro athlete bro down who's like too cool to talk. And that was always something I enjoyed about being an athlete, is meeting new people. And, if you're lucky enough to have a sponsor say, hey, can you go to this bike shop, or, hey, can you go to this brewery and like do a meet and greet? And like meet and greets are a pain in the ass, and like, yeah, it might be tough to put in your schedule. Fucking go do it, because you never know who you're going to meet, and it might be the thing that allows you to get a job or be, a whole new path in life that you take that you didn't expect otherwise. So I don't know. Don't be afraid to talk to people you don't know.
That's good life advice for
Yeah.
anyone. Amazing. Is there any other advice that you want to leave athletes with? And I mean, you've dropped some knowledge here for sure, but is there anything else that you want to get out there to, there's a lot of people who are just figuring this stuff out and haven't had access and haven't had mentors like you that are in their ear kind of guiding them along. Anything you want to leave them with?
Well, actually, maybe that's one of it. One of them is, as you come into a sport and you're the new hot thing, you're the hot shot. It's easy to think of the older people who have been doing the thing that you're doing as like, maybe they're not so relevant anymore and, not worth your time. Soak it in. Like, be willing to ask questions and specific questions to the things you might be going through on your own. Um, advice really needs to happen at a time when you're ready for it. Um, but you're never ready for it unless you actually think that somebody else might know something more. And it's really easy to get a little bit, too big for your britches and stand out there thinking you know everything because you've just won something big. Um, but I don't know. It's like I think being humble and having some humility your in your state, um, is probably a concept that is maybe too nebulous to really get into. But I just look at young athletes who have a level of maturity that allows them to think like that end up doing a lot better in the long run. There's nothing worse than someone who's like new onto the scene who thinks they know everything and they burn out in like 2 years and they're gone. It's just sad because it could have been something great. And that like maybe if they had seen something in a different way, maybe they would have made different decisions. But I don't know. That's probably old man Tim talking right there.
That's what they need to hear. That's absolutely, and
Exactly.
we've seen it happen. That's the thing. Like we've seen those cases so many times, and
Mhm.
there's definitely repetitive things that we see pop up. And if people can come in with a little bit more perspective, humility, depth, I was talking to somebody yesterday too. They asked me, what was the 1% that you gave your athletes that you worked with, and I said actually it was mostly books.
Yeah,
We had like
for
a
sure.
nerdy little book club that we would just pass books around between all the top athletes that I worked with. The ones that were in most cases, the best were almost all of them were readers, and they were looking for that perspective, that depth, that humility that I need to learn more. I need to learn as much as I can. I'm not done learning just because I won this thing doesn't prove anything. I got to keep going and I got to keep making myself better on and off the field, you know?
Yeah. No, that's it's very true. And if it wasn't the books that you were helping to suggest that the athletes read, it was probably the dinners and the steaks that you bought. But you know, as an athlete manager, I think that you're one of the people involved in pro athletes from different sports that being able to distill down like why people are sitting across from you and like the thing that might be running through their mind. That's a really great way to connect with someone because it's funny, like when you're an athlete and you've just done a race, everyone wants to ask like, hey, how was the race? Hey, how was the race? But it's more of like, what, hey, how are you? Like it to connect on at the human level to then find out the thing that might be worrying them or might be exciting them or might be terrifying them, or it might be stressing them out, um, or maybe they made a mistake and they don't really realize it yet, but they're on the cusp of realizing it. And the conversation that you have, both as a boss but as a supportive boss, is huge. It's so helpful because I think it kind of like it flattens everything down when it's just a set of expectations that you find impossible that you have to try and figure out how to get to. when you have someone like yourself who can kind of meet you in the middle and help bring you up, that's where the real elevation of the athlete happens.
Mhm. And it goes back to, what you talked about of finding those valuable relationships that are more
Yeah.
important than the shiny object. Find the right people that are going to be in your corner as, yeah, your managers, your mentors, your supporters, your mechanics, whoever it is. Like finding those people, your circle
Mhm.
is that's the highest leverage you can have as an athlete, and that's what makes everything else kind of seem to click.
Bingo. That's it.
That seems like a good place to wrap it up.
Exactly. Good work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time, and thanks for dropping knowledge. I think this is really valuable for a lot of people, and like you said, there's a lot of people, they have to be ready to hear this stuff, but when they are ready, this is the kind of stuff that is important. This is the stuff that matters, and to get perspective of somebody who's made it through the gauntlet, ultimately is rare and helpful. So, thanks again for this.
Yeah. No, there you go. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to hearing the rest of these. Can't wait.